Alex, what does being a great session player mean to you?
I think being a great session player is kind of like being a Swiss Army knife. Kind of have the tool ready for anything and everything. That's really the main thing that I think about. And that comes across as, being a Swiss Army knife when it comes to being a player and for being a person. You're dealing with a lot of different musical situations, and you're dealing with a lot of situations when it comes with interacting with people. So it's kind of being the right tool for whatever comes your way. That's kind of what it is.
Absolutely. Yeah. What a great way to think about it. And the understanding that it's not just about the playing, but also about, the hang, as we say.
It's multifaceted. That's kind of the thing that I always think about. It's, it's one thing to be a great player, but it's putting it all together and, being a good person to be around and being a good player all at the same time. That kind of makes it all work.
Absolutely. So building those musical tools within your Swiss Army knife, where did that start for you as a kid?
Man, for me, it started with playing piano. My grandma played piano and my uncle did as well. So I kind of grew up hearing them play all the time. So for me, it literally was just crawling up on the piano bench next to them, watching them play. I just always had it as a part of my life and just loved being around it. And that ended up turning into lessons and, being classically trained and all that stuff, just kind of starting there and growing from there as well.
So where did your first gig start to come from?
In high school really is when I first had my true first professional music experiences. We had a great band director there, and we were kind of known for our jazz band. We had a fantastic jazz band. I got to play piano in it. I pretty much every year that I was there. And kind of as an offshoot of that, we started with the help of our band director, a little jazz quartet, and we ended up booking gigs kind of around town in the DC area. We were playing private parties. We had a weekly gig at a restaurant. And that was really my first experience as being a professional musician, for lack of a better term. I mean, it sounds silly when you're 15 years old, but it's like we were running a band. We obviously had help from the school and everything like that. We had some connections that we utilized through the school, but we were playing gigs, again, doing private parties and everything like that. We got to rub elbows with a lot of politicians in the area. I remember we did an event for Colin Powell. So doing stuff like that was like, wow, I want to do this for the rest of my life, Yeah.
So where did that extend to once you're through high school? Did you go to college for music?
Yeah, I did. So I ended up going to Berkley College of Music in Boston. It was great for me. I loved my time there. Got to meet so many incredible people and musicians and friends that I still have to this day. Really just be pushed by one another to keep trying to improve your craft and get better every single day. So that aspect has helped me more than anything in my career is my time at school. So yeah, studied that for 4 years and loved it. Loved every second of it. Worked at a venue up in Boston and figured, all right, well, I'm going to do that, and ended up moving down here to Nashville right after I graduated, looking to get a music business job in the industry.
Gotcha. And so when you moved here, did you get a music business job?
I did. So it's funny. I was working for a booking agent. I was booking a bunch of local bands, and I was playing a little bit on the side too. I'd met some friends up in Boston who had moved down here to Nashville, and they were, playing some small gigs around town. So it was like, yeah, I'll play piano for you or accompany you while I'm kind of getting my footing in the business end of things. Just did a bunch of different things just to kind of stay afloat, as we all do when we first get to town. And kind of this weird shift happened where I was trying to put all my eggs into the industry jobs, and I was getting just way more opportunities playing.
So when these first gigs started happening, is it mainly live? When did the studio stuff start to happen, and where does that balance lie for you?
It was pretty much all live. I mean, for all intents and purposes, I was a touring musician through and through. And it wasn't until, I'd say probably about 6 or 7 years ago, just every now and again, something would pop up where either someone that I played with in the past or someone that I was currently playing with just ended up needing keyboard players. And I feel like unlike drums or guitar or bass, we're not as dime a dozen. I think, there's so many good guitar players in this town, and there's a handful of good keyboard players. So just, I think really because of that, I would just end up getting called to do a couple things here and there.
And were those first opportunities coming from people that you were playing live with?
Yeah, a lot of the time. Again, whether that was currently playing with them or people that I played with in the past, or even, again, people that I went to school with who just ended up needing something quick, or like, oh, I just need this project. We just decided to throw keys on it last second. Like, could you do this? So really that was my first taste of any recording, at least professionally. And I really can point it all the way back on a session, again, that I did with a classmate of mine. Needed keys on something. I ended up playing with him. Going to the studio, and I met this producer, Jordan Schmidt, played the session for this guy and ended up going great. And Jordan at the end of it was like, hey, I have sessions every now and again that I might need keys on. Would you be interested in playing on some things that I have for you when they come up? And I was like, sure. Traded info. And that kind of started my relationship with him, where then a month down the road, he called me, hey, I have this demo I'm working on. Like, it could really use some keys. Could you put something on it? It's like, sure, do it from the house, send it off to him, maybe hear from him a month later, do the same thing. Then it was like every 3 weeks, you'd hear from him, every 2 weeks. And it's like every week he's sending me songs. And I'm like, wow, okay. I'm like, he's doing a lot of stuff. He seems to be getting bigger and bigger, and he wants me to play on all this stuff. And I remember at that time I was touring on a road gig with like a major label signed artist. We were doing a shed tour in the summer. I've got like all my gear on the truck, and I'd wake up on the bus in the morning and have a text from my buddy Jordan, and he would say, hey, I've got this song, and it's for Florida Georgia Line, and Tyler Hubbard's singing on it, and we need keys on it as fast as we can. Can you get it to us? And I'm like, yeah, man, no problem. I'm thinking, oh gosh, how am I going to do this? So I like wake up, throw shorts on, run off the bus, grab my keyboards out of their cases on the truck. They're about to be set up on stage, and I'm like, I'll send them up later. Bring my Nord into the back of the bus and the back lounge and set up my laptop and get my interface and kind of get everything set up. Play the track as quick as I can. Upload WAV files on bus Wi-Fi. Takes 3.5 hours to send 100 megabytes. Send it off to my buddy, and it was like, oh, this is perfect. And it's like, wow, I'm like getting these opportunities to play, and I'm like stuck on the back of the bus. I probably did that for about a year. When that gig that I was on ended up ending, I remember calling Jordan and being like, could I just do this? Like, do you think I'm good enough? At that point, in the beginning, he wasn't signed or anything. And at that point he had a big publishing deal, and he had #1 records. And I was like, do you think that I could like do this for you full time? Like, not do the road thing? And he was like, yeah, definitely. And I remember that was a hard phone call for me, trying to like figure out what the next step of my career was, knowing that like probably wasn't going to be touring anymore. And I really didn't want it to be touring anymore. Just, am I good enough to do this? And I remember he tells me now that when he got that phone call from me, he was on the phone going, yes, because he was so happy that I would be a little more available now for him. So that's really, I can point it to him. That's kind of how I got my start.
So with you starting classically on piano and not necessarily like in church, was it playing organ something that you picked up on in Nashville or beforehand?
I did at Berkley. That was really the first time that I learned Hammond organ. They had some incredible professors there that were literally just dedicated to Hammond organ.
Wow.
So those were some of my most fun classes that I took, because we'd be playing, everything from Bob Marley to, just a huge, anything that dealt with Hammond organ, we'd be diving into, and really getting to know the nuances of how to do drawbars, even learning how to do the foot pedals and volume and switching the Leslie. Like, I knew nothing going in, and ended up really cutting my teeth there with some of those professors.
Maybe from the outside looking in the keyboard chair, it could be a surprise to some people that you have to kind of know how to play everything that has keys on it, to do that, and then where to pull the sounds from because of the Swiss Army knife thing that you may be called on to do that, and you hope to be able to at least be passable within it, but to really be able to excel, you really have to be comfortable on each instrument, and kind of the same way. Were there any types of keyboard instruments or sounds that you weren't as comfortable with that you recognized in a session, like, oh man, I need to come back next time and be able to kill this?
Yeah, for me, it was definitely synth, at least in the beginning. I just didn't play a lot of it playing live. Again, I was recreating most of the parts from a record when I was touring with these artists, but most of that stuff would either be in the tracks or there wasn't much of it to begin with. And then once I started to transition into the studio world, I just wanted to get a little bit of a better grasp of it. And again, some of that too just comes from being curious of these sounds that I was starting to hear, not only in country music, but that was already prevalent in pop and everything like that. Mm-hmm. And just being like, well, I love these sounds. Could I utilize these sounds here? So for me, a lot of it was learning synth.
So much value in making sure that your Swiss Army knife is fully equipped.
That's right. And sharpening all the blades all the time, it's
all the time is
evolving.
The big part too, because we always have to keep growing and learning and picking up new things and all of that. Are there any ways that you start to discover new sounds, new approaches, new ways that you might do something? How does your creative process continue to evolve so you can maintain your relevancy?
Yeah, I mean, I'm always looking into new software instruments, into new, effects, everything like that. Just using things in different ways than I maybe normally would. And just always tweaking. Again, the songs are changing every day. It's not just the sounds. Like getting inspired by something new that's happened or new that's happening, and really pulling from that. Listening to pop radio or listening to EDM or listening to soul or really any genre. Like there's boundaries within every genre being pushed, not just country. And knowing too, like knowing that you don't always have to push the boundaries of where a song is sonically. Sometimes taking it back to being simple and super organic is more hip than putting all these bright, fancy new synthesizers on things. So It's just kind of looking at it from that aspect and just finding different ways to be inspired. I feel like the more that you think about it, the less creative it can be. It's almost like, okay, what am I hearing in my head? What's the first thing that comes in my head when I hear this song? Let's chase that.
Overthinking can really pull away from the creative process, but it's a challenging thing to do, and there's so much on the line.
Yeah, I mean, there definitely is. It's that difficult balance, and there's all these rules, like especially in sound design, where you can create a lot of cool stuff if you break the rules. Like, yeah, sure, you probably shouldn't put a distortion after a reverb, but like, watch this and like see if this works, and different things like that, where it's like, let's just see what happens. Like sometimes it's okay to go for it and not hit the mark and say, all right, well, let me dial this back. I think when you start to become afraid of failing in a sound design element, that's when it starts to be safe. And obviously there's a place for everything, but you should probably take some chances. It can make a difference sometimes.
Yeah, absolutely. So when you're in a high pressure environment or seemingly high pressure environment, in a tracking session with major producer, major artist, there's a lot of focus, and there may be a little bit of a expectation to be able to get there in a somewhat quick way. Typically in a master session, you're going to have a lot more time than in a demo session to be able to experiment with ideas. But there still is a creative process of getting to the point where you're ready for that experimentation, because the foundation of the groove and the feel of the track needs to be established.
That's right.
Now, with live tracking sessions these days, especially with the pop side of country music, or popular top 40 music in general, there's usually some pretty strong pre-production elements there, right, where there's kind of like, you know, that established thing, but there's still the moment where you need to get everybody kind of together where it feels like we're moving towards, you know, the right thing. Where do you start to learn when is the good time and maybe not the right time to bring out that new crazy idea that might totally move the song in the right direction or might like slow everything down?
Yeah, I mean, that's one of the hardest things that I think we deal with, at least in the keyboard chair, on a day in, day out basis. It's when do you do your meat and potatoes, and you know, when do you bust out that new spice that you've been working on? So for me, it's a lot of things. I mean, if I'm instantly inspired, if I hear something in my head, I'm going to chase it. Like I don't know any other way to do it. That's kind of my process. If I hear a song and I think, oh, you know what, that like it would be really cool to have this kind of sound, and I'll chase it first thing that I do. I almost feel like there's the most time as soon as you've heard the song, everyone's kind of shuffling into the live room. Some people are getting coffee, some people are going to the bathroom. Like, I'm going to make a beeline to my rig, and I'm going to put my headphones into my own jack and mute the monitor so no one can hear. And I'm going to dial something up really quickly just to see if like, okay, here's kind of what I was thinking of. Let me see if I can get something quickly to that sound and let it rip and see if it invokes something. Mm-hmm. See if the producer is immediately like, what the heck is that? Like, see if everyone around me is like, oh, you know, sometimes too, when you're about to start a song, you know, guitar will pick up, they'll start tuning, drums will start, you know, figuring out what snare drum they're going to use. There's kind of that moment, and there's a lot of magic in that moment. You like to think maybe from the outside looking in, it's like, oh, well, in a recording studio, a lot of that magic comes after the band has played it a lot, like, you know, maybe 5, 6, 7 takes. The band's really starting to get into it. Sometimes those building blocks are happening right in that moment, right, where everyone's just picking up their guitar, the first thing that they play, the first thing that comes to my mind that I'm playing. I'm kind of working around the chords and the voicings, trying to see if something like that will work. It's in those moments that I feel like a lot of the character of songs is made. Mm-hmm. And that's kind of the important time for me, to just kind of dial something up, hear kind of where everyone is in terms of a starting point, see mm-hmm. if what I was thinking is going to work with what they're thinking of. And, you know, if it's something where, okay, this part's going to be pretty prominent, like getting out ahead of it. Mm-hmm. Whereas a guitar player might be doing something super prominent and be like, okay, well, that's cooler than what I thought. Let me start dialing up something that's going to support that. Let me throw away my idea that was like, I was going to be kind of the front and center thing right off the bat. It's that balance of finding that. That's where the magic happens, I think. Yeah, definitely. Yeah, there's this pretty powerful moment when that happens. Mm-hmm. It's also a moment where you can sneak in something that you're unsure about and see if anybody like looks up. You're like, oh, I'm just getting this under my fingers. Oh, yeah, I hit the wrong button. No, I wasn't doing. That's not my tone. So yeah, or when they're like, wow, that's amazing. You're exactly. Like, oh yeah, I just came up with this. Yeah, and sometimes it's that too. Sometimes I just have, you know, from getting set up, a sound pulled up, and you know, I sit down and I'm just getting the chords under my fingers, or being like, okay, the vocal was doing this. Okay, that was those keys, and I'm kind of just fumbling through it without any intention of playing that part or that voicing or that sound. And then you hear the control room, who's doing that? Who's doing that? I'll be like, oh, that was me. I was just kind of figuring out. That's awesome. That's awesome. And it's like, all right, I guess we're doing that, you know. Right. And it's being ready to kind of turn on a dime. The scenario where they're like, I don't think that's the right thing. And it's like, got it. I'm on to the next thing. Like mm-hmm. being ready to change gears quick if you need to, right. and knowing when to do so. Yeah. So how is your rig set up in a way to allow you to do that? How do you balance the idea of like presets and like in signal flow? And tell us a little bit about like how your rig is positioned and set up, and for you to be able to jump between sounds quickly. Yeah. So I have usually I have 2 analog synths, and then I have a Nord that I'm pretty much using as a controller, and I've got all that hooked up to my laptop. So I'm running I'm running Logic. I'm kind of using that as my mothership, right? So I can obviously use sounds built in from the Nord. I can use my built-in sounds from the synths, obviously. And then I've also got software instruments, effects, everything like that loaded up, ready to go on my laptop. And again, I have just tons of starting points. So I know in the control room when we're listening down to a song, I know like, okay, I'm probably going to start on, my software synth for this, kind of get that sound dialed up, or like, you know what, I know that there was piano on that song, but I think the grand is just going to be like too perfect and pretty. Like, let me dial something up on my computer, have it be more of a character piano, like an upright, something like that. So just kind of having all those at the ready, where, based on the song, I can pull this up and at least have a really good starting point. And then they say, okay, that's, it's a little too bright. Pull some effects. Like, we want a little wash here, throw some delays, throw some reverb on there. Like, have a spot where you can kind of, do your workflow, get something going where you can quickly get to where you're at least thinking the producer wants to go.
So how is that template set up for you when you pull it up?
I typically will have a few software synths that I use all the time, loaded up and ready to go.
Are there any particular ones that you use all the
time? Yeah, I love all the Contact stuff. I have, when you pull up my Contact, I have like 40 different instruments that I use a lot. I use Omnisphere a ton. It's kind of having those like go-to synths that in a scenario where you are on the clock and it's a bit of a high pressure scenario, like you can get to things quickly.
With those virtual synths, do you start with presets that you've
Sometimes
pre-made with presets that are there, or have you just learned to get quickly to start with the blank canvas and then tweak to get it?
Yeah, it's a mix. Sometimes it'll be a scenario where I have presets that I've built that are great little starting blocks. But like, as far as, especially in a piece of software like Omnisphere, where there's thousands upon thousands, like that's just not a great scenario to be in when you're there on the floor, all eyes are on you, everyone's live, the drummer's about to count off, and you're like going one by one through through all these sounds, and like you hit one and it sounds like you're in a horror film, and then you hit the next one and you're back at the EDM festival. It's like you need to kind of have everything dialed in where you can get to things quick, because sometimes will you have the time to go through? Absolutely. But, the majority of the time you need to get there a little quicker. So it's a mix of everything.
Would you say that a lot of times the presets are set up to sound better when you're demoing it or on like the promo video for the plugin than to be utilized in a record?
Sometimes, yes. I rarely now I will end up using like just your stock presets. I feel like there's always something that I don't love about them. It could be close, and it's really, that's one of the things that's so beneficial, and probably so frustrating, is like 99 times out of 100, that preset that you click on in the bank of the software instrument is not going to be viable for this very specific song that you're going to do. So it's knowing how to hear that and go, okay, that's close, but we need to do this. We need to change that delay from a dotted to, an eighth. And we need to take off that reverb, and, why is there a phaser on that? Like, and then like that cutoff is way too high. Knowing how to quickly change those parameters, like hearing it and saying, okay, immediately, boom, 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 boom. These are the things that need to change about this before it can even possibly work. Right. Then you inevitably can do all that work, and then the producer's like, I don't know, man. So, it's being able to hear things and change them quickly on the fly when you're dealing with presets. But a lot of that stuff too, if I find something that I like, or I'm dialing things and I find a sound that I'm really gravitating towards, I will end up saving it and putting it in my own folder.
Is there anywhere that you organize preset folders within a plugin to be able to label things, to access things?
Sometimes a program will have a spot for that where you can like star things, or you can resave over it, or you can rename it, or you could put it in a different folder. I know in my Omnisphere, I have a whole category that's only stuff that I have, and then I can kind of describe it a little bit better than like haunting woods. It's like, what does haunting woods sound like? I mean, I have a general idea, but like, what is it? So you can be like pad with it's good for fast moving chord changes, or like pad for slow moving chord changes. And then in other synths, there's not that. So I literally have a note on my computer, which obviously I have set up in my system, in my kind of studio rig. And sometimes I'll just access that note and be like, oh, I remember that there was a sound that would work that I have dialed up in this software synth. Like, let me see what that was called. And then I have notes on like, okay, this Haunting Woods 5 sounds really good on songs like this. Good starting point for that. Can reference that, pull it up. Because I don't know. I can't. I don't know if there's anyone out there who can. I certainly can't remember all these presets with the crazy names and everything and know like these are the good ones. These are ones that are workable. So I literally have a note on my computer of some of that stuff.
Within your template, you mentioned that you also have effects kind of like preloaded in. I assume like delay, reverb, that sort of thing. Are there any specific plugins that you lean towards for those tools?
Yeah, I mean, for me, it's like all the standard ones, right? So like a lot of the Sound Toys stuff I use all the time. Val, verbs, and delays are fantastic. Running EQs, just having that control. And too, like for keyboard, the great thing about it is I can map some of those parameters to my knobs and I can control them in real time, which really makes a huge difference. I know we were talking about sound design and kind of how do we evoke this emotion? Okay, this part is, I'm holding one note. I can't just hold one note and have it be the same velocity for the entire song. Like I need to ebb and flow with the song, peak and valley when the song does. And automating on the fly allows you to do that and really invoke those emotions. So I have an expression pedal that I can map parameters to. So sometimes it's, the dry and wet on the verb. So I can really dial that back and forth. Sometimes it's the delay. Sometimes it's side chain. How much side chain do I have? Really being able to take control of all of those can take your pretty good keyboard part to like wow, this is an amazing, perfectly tailored keyboard part for this song.
Yeah, I mean, being able to make that sound more expressive and more emotional allows the producer to be able to just have it or sit in the track where it should be, as opposed to you saying, well, imagine this once you edit it.
Yeah, exactly.
And, and get it there, which I'm sure really helps you stand out, but also helps the creative process in general, because there's less imagination that needs to happen about what it's going to sound like later, but it already sounds like it exists where it's supposed to.
Yeah, definitely. And honestly, that was something that I was confused about when I first started playing on records. I kind of assumed that I was like, oh, well, I'll play this and then the producer will put on like all the cool effects and they'll make it sound cool and vibey. I just need to put down kind of what I can put down. They'll kind of craft it into this amazing thing that sounds like a record. And I came to find out it's like, no, that's actually on me. Like if I want those things to happen sonically, they need to come from my chair. These producers are capable of doing all those things, but when you're able to do that in the chair, on the floor, as it's all happening, that can take it to the next level, and it's really important.
Is there anything else that you use in your template?
Not the only thing that I'm doing, and I a lot of people do it, but I'm running everything. Like all of my audio sources are running into Logic, and then I can put effects on anything, whether it's the analog synths or my software synths or sounds off of the Nord. All of that audio flow is going into my Apollo, back into Logic, and then out. So I can kind of put all those parameters that we were talking about onto just about anything that's coming through it. So that's been a huge thing for me. It's like having the zero latency Apollo stuff, running the UA plugins, running other plugins, having it all be able to happen on the fly.
So on the interface side, you mentioned that you use an Apollo.
Yeah.
What type of Apollo do you use?
I have the Twin.
Cool. And did you experiment with different types of interfaces before that, or?
Yeah, I had a Focusrite before that. It just really got to the point where again, once I was kind of diving more into effects and everything like that, the Apollo pretty much seemed like it was my best case scenario, especially for my workflow. Being able to use those plugins in real time was very appealing to me. And again, I've run those pretty much on anything that I've ever recorded, is going through my Apollo, going through my signal chain on there. And it's just an imperative part of my chain.
So you're using the UAD plugins. And is that something that you have specific for different tracks, or do you have like sort of a master treatment kind of thing that's going before your output?
Usually it's for specific tracks. I don't have like a master bus or anything that I'm running through, just because, again, my sounds can be so different from part to part, from track to track, to song. So really it's being able to throw them on when I need to, in conjunction with all the software plugins and software synths that I have running on my laptop. Just being able to use any and all of that at any point in time, giving me the flexibility to do so. Trying to remove as many restrictions as I can, and the UA stuff was a huge part of that.
Are there any of those specific plugins that you find yourself using quite a bit?
Yeah, I love the tape simulators. I love a lot of the verbs. The Ocean Wave verbs are fantastic. Like, I dial up a lot of that stuff a good bit of the time. Compressors, I mean, you name it. That library continues to grow and grow and grow. And it's just fantastic.
As you build the foundation to be able to be prepared to play the part, you come up with the part, you're able to craft the sound. But then a big process of our job is learning how to translate what the person that hired us is really going for.
That's right.
And that can be a really challenging thing to navigate that changes every day, because there's a different language that's kind of spoken in the studio and in production world. And then there's also a different dialect of that language that is spoken between each individual person that you work with.
That's
because
exactly
music
right.
is so subjective. Are there any experiences where you learned the importance of really diving into that language and overall, and then learning how to discern or translate the different dialects that happen within that language in the studio?
Just hearing you ask that reminds me of a specific time. It was one of my first probably big recording sessions. Again, I was in a room with people I probably did not deserve to be in the room with, recording for an artist I probably did not deserve to be recording with. And I just kind of went into autopilot of how I would typically work with Jordan, who I'd at that point worked the most with. And very quickly it became clear to me, like, oh, this producer wants something completely different than what I typically do. Like, I need to be mindful. I need to ask. I need to just get a better read of it. And that's something that I've kind of carried on to pretty much every session after that. It's easy to think that you know what someone wants, but it is so helpful to just, before you walk into the room, be like, hey, so on the demo, there was a lot of piano on that. Do you still want it to be kind of piano driven? And sometimes they'll be like, yeah, absolutely. Or they'll be like, no, I'd love to hear, what your first instinct would be if it wasn't piano. Stuff like that, where it's a quick question that takes 5 seconds and it completely changes how those first few takes are going to go.
As your career evolves and you get to a point where, man, I'm doing what I love, I'm making a living, but we don't have like normal business hours. How have you been able to manage balancing family and life and the passion for playing your instrument, your job?
As things got busier and busier for me, it was like right around the pandemic. My wife and I had our first son in 2019, and it's like, so we had the kids and we had the pandemic and all these things. So a lot of it was just like, for my mental health, you have to set those boundaries. Like, you're not always going to be able to do everything all at once. Some people can. I can't, especially I tell my wife this too, like, at the end of the day, this is not me just like going in, clocking in and clocking out. Like, I'm needed to be personable. I'm needing to be creative. I need to come up with these ideas. And that's not just like an ever flowing pool that I can pick from,
Right.
Like, you need to fill that pool up now and again. Or else it'll run out.
Right.
So really it's just doing those things, I typically don't work on the weekends anymore. And because I want to spend that time with my kids and with my wife and going on a hike, doing those things, because doing that is better for me than taking another session.
Is there anything that you do for yourself on like a weekly or daily basis to sort of like center your focus or mindset?
Yeah, I try to get moving. I love getting out in nature. I love hiking, whether it's with my kiddos or on my own. I love bike riding. I occasionally get out on a run, even though I despise it, but I know it's good for me. So doing stuff like that, normally I feel the most like recharged when I completely beat down my body and I feel completely depleted. Like my energy level is zero because I like went and hiked 15 miles. That's when I'm like, okay, I'm ready to get back and sit in a studio with no windows for a while.
So for the next generation of the musician that is coming up, looking at you, trying to figure out how you're playing your parts and is doing what you did with the folks that came, before you and all that. Or for your past self that will somehow in the future end up going in a time machine, back and you're when you're reincarnated and you become a player again. Right. What do you wish you would have you could say to yourself, back then that would be maybe helpful to help you navigate into the future of your career?
Yeah, that's a great question. It's one that I've thought about too starting. I always didn't know that there was room for me. And that was kind of the thing that I was always so surprised that there was. I just thought that there wasn't any more space for someone to do what I do. I just looked at all the great keyboard players that there are in this town, whether older or newer. And I was just like, I just feel like that's covered. And then once I started to get more involved is when I realized there actually is a space for me. And sitting down with guys like Dave Cohen and David Dorn, who are kind of this, new echelon of studio player in the keyboard chair, how welcoming they were to me. Instead of being like, oh, you're our competition, instead of being like, we need you. I mean, they literally were like, we need more people. It was just shocking for me to hear, quite honestly, because for a long time I was like, well, I'm just not going to do that because there's not room for me. If I had just continued to listen to that little voice inside of my head, I certainly wouldn't be here. So knowing that there is room for you, whether you play drums or bass or guitar, are there people ahead of you right now who are wildly talented and not anywhere close to being done? Absolutely. But that doesn't mean that you can't bring anything to the table. That's something that I think would be the most important thing to say. And then for me too, talking with my story, I looked at all these people doing it, getting their start in this vastly different way than I did. And so I think I would tell myself a few years ago or someone coming up, like, it's okay to do things completely differently. That might be just what someone is looking for. Again, you've said so many times, like, music is subjective. What one person might be like, that's not how we do it here. Another person might be like, let's try that. Having the courage to kind of go your own way, right. Blaze your own path. Mm-hmm. That's perfectly fine. And in some scenarios, you can be rewarded for doing it a different way.
Right.
And that's okay. I feel like for a long time, I was like, well, I can't do it this way. I have to do it this way. That's how they did it. And learning by doing it, like, it's actually really cool that I did it a different way. And I feel like I got a leg up by doing it that way.
Right.
So I feel like whatever door is cracked and you can pry open, that works just as well. Whether it's the front door, the back door, the side door, mm-hmm. Whatever you can make work and whatever works best for you, I think that's a great way to do it. So right. just stick to what you've got going for you.
Yeah, that's amazing, man. And that works with sound. And it also works with you're thinking about your career path.
That's right.
Every door in that building is still going to get you inside, or the window, or
that's
you
right.
got to climb up the gutter.
Yeah, that's
to
right.
Get in through the attic.
Go down the chimney, Santa Claus style. If you got to, as long as you're in the room, it doesn't matter how you got there.
Yeah, absolutely. I think at times it may feel like if you're taking a different path and you're seeing prospectively everyone else taking a path that sort of seemed to go in that direction, but you're not there. You're like, well, how am I ever going to get to where they're at if I'm like on this completely different road? But then understanding that road can still lead you there. There's just a different, set of directions.
Yeah, that's exactly right. I mean, for a long time, I kind of viewed me being primarily busy and doing remote tracks from the house, like that somehow that was a detriment to me as a session player. And it was like, no, I just need the time to, kind of work on that. And it ended up being a benefit to me, kind of cutting my teeth in that way. So by the time that I did get in the room, I was ready to go. I didn't have those kind of growing pains like maybe some others had. So, what you foresee to be a bad thing can potentially be a really good thing for you.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. Well, it's so great hearing about your story. Thank you so much for joining us. I think people are going to gain so much from learning this, and that's our goal, to be able to help to bring up the next generation, help bring up our peers that are just looking for a new perspective and a way of, thinking about something. But if someone's out there making a living or working on making a living with their instrument, we're very fortunate to have people like yourself tell your story and share your insight so we can keep this incredible community of musicians alive.
Yeah. Well, hey, I can't thank you enough. This was a lot of fun. I really appreciate you having me on.
Absolutely, man. Thank you.